Hicks, Newt, Ripley, and Bishop are all named from the movie Aliens. And Hicks was the big macho guy that everybody seemed to love, including Sigourney Weaver, who was Ripley.
Does Hicks live up to his name?
No, he should have had a clown name or something off the Muppets versus something off of Aliens.
He does have a bit of that look, eh?
Yeah, he looks more like a Muppet than an alien. He certainly doesn't look like the traditional Bernese Mountain Dog.
Some people would do just about anything to save their dog. Well, today on NSK9, we're with a Bernese Mountain Dog 7 years after an experimental surgery and a heart condition that could have taken his life.
The night that Hicks was born, he was born the first of the litter early in the morning. And when he was born, he couldn't hold his head up, he couldn't nurse. You could tell right from day one that there was an issue. Never thinking it was his heart, we just sort of thought it was him being the runt of the litter. He fit in the palm of my hand. So at that time, he had to be hand-fed, hand-reared, had to be held to his mom. Had to have a babysitter when I went to work. And by 7 weeks, when we brought all the puppies to the vet to have their initial checkup, we found his first heart murmur. But it was only slight. He was a small dog. We didn't really suspect much. But he never really developed like the other dogs. All the other dogs would run and play, and he'd just sort of sit and watch everybody. And then by the time we got to 12 weeks, if he ran and played and was playing or anything like that, he would faint. And he did that in Dr. West's office, and she said, "How long has this been going on?" And I said, "Well, you know, it happens every time." And she listened to his heart, and she said, "He's got a severe heart murmur. He needs to go to PEI."
And so with that, Annette and Hicks were off to the Atlantic Veterinary College in Prince Edward Island, leaving her other dogs, Ripley and Newt, behind. It was in PEI that they met a veterinarian who is one of a growing number of vets who have chosen to specialize.
Specifically, I'm a veterinary cardiologist. So veterinary medicine has evolved in many ways, similarly to some aspects of human medicine, where you can't know it all. And so there are some people like me who become veterinary specialists. So I deal with patients who are known to have or suspected to have heart disease, and that can be from a kitten to a draft horse, everybody in between.
So we went to PEI, we met up with Dr. Cote and his team, and Hicks went off like the little trooper that he is, and Dr. Cote walked back in after pretty much a full day of testing, and he walked back in with a box of tissues.
What Hicks has is subaortic stenosis, and what that means is a dog's heart is like a person's heart. It's a pump made of muscle, circulates the blood around the body. And one of the ways that that works well is when the chambers of the heart contract, and specifically the left ventricle, when it pushes blood out to your circulation, it should do that smoothly. But Hicks was born with a narrowing in the outflow of his heart to his circulation. So instead of a kind of a funnel and tube out to your circulation, he had an hourglass. And that's a problem because it means that his heart had to work extremely hard to try and push blood past that narrowing and to the rest of his body. Dogs that have a degree of this, like Hicks had, are not expected to live a normal life.
There was no cure. It was a death sentence. So that's all I could think of is it has to be something that they can fix. It can't be something like this. So it was a pretty scary, but I don't know, it was sort of surreal. You didn't want to believe that that's what it was going to be or that's what was going to happen. You're sort of looking on the bright side. No, can't be the worst possible case scenario. Originally, the only treatment was to put him on medication, and most of the dogs will die before they're a year old. Their their hearts just can't sustain to support the rest of the body with the narrowing. He said, oh, he said, do you know what that means? And I said, yes. I said, it means a death sentence. And he said, well, he also has pulmonary stenosis. So then he started to go through the treatment regimen, and at one point in time he said, and we have a surgery. And I just sort of looked at him, I said, there's no surgery. He said, we've got a surgery now.
What was interesting about Hicks is that his condition, we identified his condition when a new procedure was developed or was emerging for how to treat it. So it was a fortunate kind of timing in that way.
So we talked about the surgery, and it was so new that he didn't even have, if I had said yes right away, he could not have done it. He had to get supplies in from the States. So it gave me a bit of time to think about it and to also think about the monetary problems. Hicks had insurance, but the insurance considered this to be a pre-existing condition, so they wouldn't cover it.
The proposed surgery was going to be expensive, but Hicks was a member of Annette's family, and not doing the surgery really wasn't an option. Annette took Hicks to Prince Edward Island and returned home to Nova Scotia for work, while she waited anxiously for an update. It was a complex and dangerous procedure.
So the day before the surgery, I drove to PEI, I dropped him off, and then I went back to work as a firefighter, with him knowing he was going to have his surgery the next morning.
We're not entering into the heart through the chest. This isn't an open chest surgery. It's a minimally invasive catheter-based surgery. So we placed Hicks under general anesthesia, so he was fully asleep, and we entered into his neck through his blood vessels to advance catheters to work inside the heart without being in the chest. We did this under fluoroscopy, so motion picture x-rays. And by steering those instruments or catheters into place, we first cut or nicked that narrowing tissue and then stretched it so that it expanded to allow the blood to be able to flow more normally.
Dr. Cote phoned and said everything went well. They were able to do exactly what they wanted to do. He was doing fine. And, you know, there couldn't have been a better case scenario. Went home, finished work, thought everything was wonderful. We were getting a little bit of snow that night. It was late November. And then all of a sudden, about 11 o'clock at night, I get a phone call, and it's Dr. Cote. And things are not going well. He's been called back. Hicks has pneumonia, and they're having problems keeping him alive.
The most common food that's dangerous to dogs is chocolate. And that's because it contains a chemical called theobromine, which causes excitation, and high doses can even cause seizuring and coma. And it's highest in dark chocolate and lowest in white chocolate. And milk chocolate's right in the middle. So the best thing is to avoid all chocolate. But other common things are going to be xylitol, an artificial sweetener, which can cause extreme drops in blood sugar, onions and garlic, which can cause anemias or destruction of red blood cells. But probably the most common one I run into is just fat. High levels of fat in food trigger something called pancreatitis, which is potentially life-threatening, and I see it on a weekly basis. So the best thing to do is just avoid high-fat foods.
I went over, and we would spend, you know, as much time in their little family room with him as he could be when he was off IV. And like he wouldn't lift his head. All he just wanted to do was sleep. So I sort of lay on the floor with him and cuddled into him, and then put the blanket that Ripley had been on next to him, and he sort of took a couple of deep breaths of that. He just wasn't doing well.
Eventually, Dr. Cote's team was able to stabilize Hicks. And with an uncertain prognosis, Annette decided it was time for Hicks to come home to Nova Scotia.
I just felt he would do better at home with Ripley and Newt than being in a hospital environment where he wasn't around us. So eventually his pneumonia cleared up enough that he could come home. And then, you know, it was the regime of constantly going back and forth for checkups. You know, a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, you know, medication changes, trying to figure out exactly what we needed to do to make sure that his health was as healthy as possible, and still not knowing what the longevity was going to be. It broke my heart. It really and truly, you know, after all that surgery, I thought, we can't, you know, how do you lose him then? Yeah. 7 years ago. 7 years.
And so here we are 7 years later.
Right.
Is that a surprise?
I mean, it's a pleasant surprise. You know, dogs, I think, like people, have any range of how they can cope with their condition, any range of how they're cared for. I mean, Hicks is in a family that is unbeatable. He's a very, very fortunate boy. And so it's a pleasant surprise because, yeah, he's a 7-year-old dog, and many or most dogs with his condition would not have made it this far.
Hicks still goes to the Atlantic Veterinary College for regular checkups, as well as for treatment of various conditions. Now, 7 years, almost to the day after the surgery, Annette and Hicks make the trip to PEI to see Dr. Cote one more time.
Well, so we're back again for, did you realize that it's 7 years on the 14th?
Is it on the 14th?
It was the 14th.
No kidding. You know, it's funny because in an instant, I'm back to the phone call and all of the drama. And here we are. Like, who would have guessed, right? 7 years down the road.
You know, like I've done a lot of reflection, well, especially doing the episode and that, a lot of reflection going back and a lot of looking at pictures, and never would I have suspected 7 years later for you to be doing a checkup on this dog.
No.
It just wasn't in the cards back then, and I just...
But, you know, that's why, right? Because it's fine to talk about generalities about dogs in general, to say, oh, you know, if you look at X number of dogs that have this type of problem, that the average is A, B, C, D. But that never accounts for everybody. And he's
him.
Hicks.
He does seem to have a little bit more energy and a little bit more play, which didn't sort of expect to see later in life, right?
Yeah, that's so strange. You know, try as we might to explain it. So if you tell me there's something
more wrong with his heart, I'm going to be like, really? Because it's not what I'm anticipating. I'm actually seeing a little bit more liveliness to him.
Yes, okay. Hey. All right, let's check him over just nose to tail. What do you think, kiddo? What I'm hearing now, despite all of what's going on, is still a nice, slow, steady heartbeat. So I think...
11 hours into it. Yeah.
So more than his past visits, I have a sense that dosage is just right because it's lasting into the 11th hour, which is great.
Oh, thank you.
With what you're describing, with his past and what I'm seeing and hearing today, I think his visit is just a standard recheck. So we'll do his echocardiogram, and I think we should be done. I would expect we'd be done by about 2 o'clock.
Okay.
Does that work? Still leaves time for cows?
Of course.
Okay.
If he doesn't get cows on the way home, like it's not good. This is a whole ritual. There's always a picture in the back of the truck with him eating his sorbet.
Which I selectively will ignore, given...
It's only a little sorbet.
All right. We've known that this abnormality has been around for a long, long time, but how to best cope with it wasn't clear, and it still really isn't. We're still discovering and needing to have even better ways of dealing with it. But yeah, it was not something that had been done in Canada at the time, and maybe a few dozen cases in the world.
Has it been done more often since?
Yeah, I would say it's still, it's a recognized procedure, but it's also a challenging procedure. It's not cheap, And it doesn't eliminate the problem entirely, it improves it, but it's still possible for it to gradually come back over time. And the degree to which that happens is different from one dog to the next. So the pros and cons exist in deciding whether the procedure should be performed. Yeah.
While his health condition will always be with him, the procedure did give Hicks a special lease on life. And that's not all that's special about Hicks.
Hicks has a desire to eat things. He has unfortunately eaten the perimeter of a yoga mat that Ripley was sleeping on, and ended up with a bleeding ulcer, needing 2 blood transfusions and part of his stomach removed. And who knew that somebody would eat a yoga mat? I mean, he has also eaten unattended socks, which a lot of the time we can't figure out where the socks come from. He's never had
They're the socks that go missing from dryers.
I'm wondering if he is the dryer monster. That would explain ever so much. He always looks so happy and so surprised. Do you always look happy? You always happy? I think he's a very happy dog. Aren't you? He's something Jim Henson from the Muppets put together. He's not the same as everybody else. It's just that little bit different.
So on average, smaller breed dogs tend to live longer than larger breed dogs, and it appears that research has yet to determine the relationship between body mass and a dog's lifespan. Some tend to think that because a large breed dog grows at a faster rate, that this correlates to the age or the rate at which they age, and therefore larger breed dogs tend not to live as long. For example, a large breed dog may only live 5 to 8 years, whereas a smaller breed dog could live 10 to 14. So overall, small breed dogs tend to live twice as long.
Things went well.
Good.
So, it's interesting. Somehow, things look a little bit better on the subaortic stenosis side, and I don't know why. Right?
You said that last time.
I feel like the path that we've taken to get to where we are, considering what you just said, that we're at the tail end of the effectiveness of the medication, I think those all, to me, would push me in favor of leaving things exactly as they are. At that time, the procedure was so new that it wasn't clear whether it would be likely to give long-lasting benefits. So we talked about that. Should we do this? Might it help? There was an amount of borrowing of knowledge from children, from pediatric cardiology, where this kind of thing is done. And so we felt it was justified to try, but is it really going to make a difference? So I think when we did this, it was in the hopes that it would provide some sort of benefit for some time. But it definitely wasn't with a sure thing in mind that 7 years later we'd be having this discussion.
I see you smiling about that when you think about the 7 years and, when you saw Annette and Hicks. Is this one of the happy stories in your career?
Absolutely. I mean, and on so many fronts, right? Just how well Hicks has done is remarkable. And I think it's a happy story because, sure, I mean, he has a heart problem, we dealt with it a certain way, and he's done so well. But it's a more broadly happy story. He's a perfect example of a dog who's wound up in a family and in a situation that works as well for him as it does for his human family. And so I guess what I mean by that is, to me, it's a pleasure to see Hicks, not just because of his heart, right? But because of who in his entourage actually are.
All right. Come on, let's go pay.
Hicks is easily just one of my most memorable patients because of his condition, but also just because of who he is and who Annette is and his family is. And when I think of what he's been through, it's always easy to look back and say, oh, you know, this was the right thing to do and this was great. But I think I want to emphasize that it wasn't an easy decision for Annette. It wasn't a sure thing, that our patients don't tell us where it hurts or if they feel better. And so they show us sometimes. But the point is that he embodies veterinary medicine in the sense that we did our best. He responded beautifully, and here we are. So he is a true success story.
A true success story indeed. Some would say a miracle. And while Hicks still struggles at times with different ailments, some related to his heart condition and some just because of his fondness for eating unusual things, he's giving back and giving comfort to others, like others gave comfort to him.
He's been a therapy dog for quite a while with the Halifax Regional Fire Department. So he's part of the crisis team. He goes to funerals and visitations, and also goes in when we're doing diffusings and debriefings.
How's life been with Hicks in those 7 years?
He keeps everybody on his toes. He is the most delightful dog to have, but he never grew up. He eats things that he shouldn't. He gets into mischief.
Gonna have some ice cream?
I said to Dr. Cote after the surgery, after he became well, I think our first trip back to see him, I said, you took my Eeyore and you turned him into Tigger. What do I do with this? And he looked at me, he goes, really? And I said, yeah. I said, I've got a dog that you're telling me not to exercise, who now all of a sudden has all kinds of energy. A dog that was obedient before because he was too tired to do anything, who's now into everything. So Hicks has been to the base of Gross Mourne. He's been all over the Cape Breton Highlands. He's hiked some of the Black Diamond Trails in Fundy National Park. And Dr. Cote keeps saying, don't tell me. I said, I gotta tell you, you know, this is a miracle that he can do any of this stuff. But he's also very self-limiting. If he runs and plays and gets too excited, he'll sit down and let himself calm down. But he's certainly a mischievous little boy when he wants to be.
Oh, you can't come to PEI and not get cows.
It's so cold.
Yeah, but it's tradition. Hicks.
Visit us online to tell us your dog stories for possible inclusion in future episodes.
Right out of the cup.
And don't forget to share photos of your canine friends on social media with the hashtag NSK9.
When I look at it and I go, how old is Hicks? And you know, somebody says, oh, he's a puppy. I'm like, no, he's 7. And it's really hard to remember that, how bad it was 7 years ago, because he does seem so healthy. But when I look back at the videos and the pictures from that time, I realize how much we've gone through with him. It's taken a real team of anesthesiologists, cardiologists, vets, chiropractors, acupuncturists to keep him going. You know, he has a whole team behind him. And it's very much trying to make sure he's as healthy as we can keep him for as long, because each day is a blessing with him.
Teaching dogs to swim? How about jumping off a wharf? It's all fun and games when it comes to water dogs. Next time on NSK9.
Some of the dogs just excel at it and they catch on really, really quickly. And it's like just a kid standing at the edge of the pool. Jump in, jump in. Some kids take a little bit of time. Other kids are diving in, no problem. And but some of the dogs, you know, if they're just getting into it, they need to build up their confidence level, and it's a great sport for confidence.